Now, we're speaking here with Mark Rocco, who's in the country to promote the new ITV Wrestling A to Z DVD, the second of the releases of old World Sport matches on ITV. Now, this is the second of these DVDs, and also the British Wrestling World Sport shows on the Wrestling Channel on Channel 427 here are the highest rated shows. Are you surprised that it's still so popular today?
Hi John, yeah I am. No, I'm not surprised at all, because we had a fantastic show in those days, in the early days with the ITV stuff. I mean, our show was the forerunner of all the WWE and all the American things that are on now. We were successful with our TV shows, and we were the benchmark that was given as a standard for everyone else to meet up with. I mean, the American wrestling show, the TV shows in America at the time were regional, and they were doing small promotional clips to promote the town shows, and it was a different thing altogether. Our wrestling shows, when we had it on ITV, were attracting up to 10 million people, which is absolutely unique. I mean, even today, the wrestling doesn't get those sort of figures, even with all the glamour and everything that's in it now.
I mean, it was a very different approach from a promotional point of view, in that the show seemed to be used more to create TV stars who could then come to your local area, and you could see a TV star in person, rather than, as you say, the American style where you were promoting specific matches. And did you find it was a very different style of promoting and putting together the shows, in that it was actually covered by ITV Sport like any other sport?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm not. Again, I have my own opinion on that, and my opinion is that in those days, in the ITV days, they were promoting a sport rather than the showbiz angle that they're using now in the WWE. I mean, we were a long time before the American wrestling had the glamour it's got now, and our wrestling channel, our ITV channels, were absolutely great. The shows that we had, all those people watching, the people that were watching every week, was taken off not because of lack of interest. It was because it was a decision made by the hierarchy in the television process, you know.
Okay, now looking back to the beginning of your career, obviously you came from a wrestling family background with your father jumping Jim Massey.
I'm fourth generation, and my son, who's a boxer now, Johnny Rocco, is taking my name. He's a boxer. So he's the fifth generation of our family that's been in the pugilist business. My great-grandfather was wrestled and boxed on the booths in the fairground. My grandfather was amateur champion of Ireland, and my father, as you know, was a wrestler for many years. I was a wrestler for 20 odd years, and my son now has had his fifth fight last Saturday, and has won his first 5 professional matches.
And I believe the first time you actually got into ring was being trained with midgets, is that right?
When I was a kid, yeah. I mean, I used to go with my dad to Germany on the tournaments there, which a lot of the guys used to do that in the early days. And you know, there was the American midget wrestlers were there. I was about 5 or 6, and the midgets gave me a pair of wrestling boots. They actually had a new pair, and they gave them to me. And they got me the ring at 5, and they just used to wrestle with me. And that's the groundwork that I did right early days, you know.
Now, it's normally quite a long process of training before you were actually ready to be put into match, right? I believe your first match came a lot earlier than you'd ever expected.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd been training in the gym behind my father's back, who didn't want me to be a wrestler. He wanted to break the mold a little bit, and I was training in the gym. My dad had a gym at the farm that we owned, and my dad was on the road wrestling, and I was training in the gym with people like Colin Joynson, and a lot of the Manchester boys, and he went to a wrestling show where the fog turned the show into a disaster because none of the wrestlers arrived, or only a few of them arrived, and they were looking for somebody to go in and do a match. And I was thrown into the ring with a pair of boots that didn't fit me, with a pair of shorts that were falling down, and I got in and I actually wrestled my first match before I was ever contracted to do so.
And you actually, this was in 1970, I believe,
Yeah.
you actually featured on television later that year, so you must have made a reasonably good
Well, I did.
good impression.
I was due to start wrestling professionally in the February, and I actually was actually wrestled before that, and I think it's about June or July for the year before, you know. So yeah, it was a rise to stardom fairly quickly. I was dedicated to the business, and I was training every minute of every day. I did that for you know, every minute I had. I was in the gym, I was learning, I was practicing, and everything else, you know.
Now, a lot of people don't realise you're actually on television from 1970, so it was 18 years altogether, which was longer than a lot of wrestlers.
Yeah.
How did you sort of keep fresh when you were appearing before the same television audience?
You had to be totally dedicated to the business. I mean, and you also had to have an ideal as well of how it should be and what should happen, you know. And I was totally dedicated. And I had a one-track mind, and all I wanted to do was to learn my job better and to be better at it. So I was absolutely fully blown wrestler early on, and I wanted to do my best. I wanted to please the crowd. I wanted to make everyone go home thinking they'd had a good night, you know. And I was absolutely intense and very, very fixed on what I thought about the wrestling.
Now, when you were wrestling on television, did you approach the way you wrestled any differently to when you were wrestling live in a hall?
None at all. I had the same idea that I wanted to be better and to do with it. But it didn't matter where it was. If it was Albert Hall or it was some little town show, I gave them my best. Every night I went into that ring, I gave my all, and I think that's been qualified by some of the TV stuff that you've seen, and the people that went along to the live shows as well. They can verify that, you know.
You had a very sort of fast-paced, action-packed style that sort of certainly stole the show a lot of the time.
People that changed the idea of the wrestling. The style of the wrestling changed with me. I had these ideas about how it should be, and also and put it into plan. Not everyone was happy with my style. Not everyone thought that, especially the TV people, they thought I was too strong, you know, for the wrestling audience. But it did work, and my mentor, my father, Jumping Jim, I asked his advice lots of times. Lots of times they said to me that they didn't want all the blood, sweat and tears, the intense wrestling. They wanted to have something more suitable for the mums and dads and the grandmas and everything else. So I never listened to that. I carried on and did my own thing. And a lot of my wrestling shows at that time weren't shown. They were sort of cancelled from going on the television because there was too much violence or blood or whatever. So not every show that I did, not every wrestling venue that I wrestled on for TV got shown on the television. A lot of them were cancelled.
Actually, jumping ahead a bit in your career to the mid to late 80s, there was a couple of years run on Screen Sport, the cable channel, where it was Brian Dixon was running the shows, and you had a lot more creative freedom as to what you could actually air on television compared with ITV, and you were one of the people that certainly took advantage of that.
Absolutely, without a doubt. The ITV Wrestling was something that had been running for 20 odd years. I went from joint promotions and I wrestled then for All Star Promotions. They then got a shot at TV, and we had a parallel show running along with joint promotion shows. And we were doing as well in the ratings as the joint promotions shows, and we were doing fantastically well. And I did have a bit of a more open thing with that. But I also, the independent shows that were shown in Welsh TV, and I did some shows in Paris that were shown on British TV. All of those things, they were a little bit less strict with what went on in the ring, and I took full advantage of that because my style, as you know, was blood, sweat and tears, and to go for it and give the public the best value for money and give my opponent the hardest time I possibly could, and that was the way I looked at it.
There's an interesting spell in the 2 years for All Star was putting shows on ITV, where you actually having a feud with Kendo Nagasaki. And
yeah, Kendo Nagasaki was an enigmatic character, and he was a very strong man, a very clever wrestler. He was one of the ultimate people that I would have thought in the business was one of the biggest crowd pullers, along with myself and Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and those sort of people. But Kendo Nagasaki was a unique character. He had his own agenda. He was very, as I said, very strong, very hard to beat. And we had a war. We literally had a war. I had no problems hurting him, and he had no problems with hurting me. You know, I mean, he was a very elusive character. I mean, I once saw him in the shower, and he had his mask on in the shower.
There was an interesting crowd reaction at the time, because it was quite a rare occasion that they were having these two arch villains going at it, and you could sort of see them trying to decide which one to support.
That's right. When the promoters first booked me and said that you're going to fight Kendo Nagasaki, I thought this will never happen, because I thought if I went in the ring and I chopped his head off with a big axe, or he chopped my head off with it, the crowd would not accept it. They would not be interested in two bad guys fighting each other. But the crowd, fantastically, went along with me and supported me for about a year when I wrestled Nagasaki.
Now, going back earlier in your career, you did something which a lot of wrestlers don't have the chance to do these days with sort of fewer and fewer promotions. You left Britain and went round Europe for a while, learning different styles from all over different countries.
I'll tell you a little story. When I originally wanted to be a professional wrestler, my father said it's a hard game. You can't be in the business unless you learn the job properly. I had to learn to satisfy my father, so I did everything. I tried to impress him by doing as much as I possibly could. I went to the Snake Pit in Wigan. I learned submission wrestling. I went to the Canary Islands and wrestled as a Canarian wrestling, which is like sumo wrestling, I suppose. I wrestled in India, wrestled oil wrestling in India. I went to Turkey, wrestled in the sand. I've wrestled everywhere I could think of to give me some credibility. I learned with one of the America's best, who was Brad Reagans, who was an Olympic medalist, and he was a fantastic wrestler. And I spent years learning with him, and learned my trade from the ground up. So anyone that tells me that didn't know my job wouldn't be correct, because I learned it the hard way, ground up.
Do you feel perhaps you came along a few years too early, because shortly after you retired there was groups such as the UWFI in Japan, which were based a lot more around the sort of shoot wrestling technical kind of style, and do you think you would have made a good fit there?
Well, when I went to Japan, I went there, I can't remember now, I went I think 1980 I think originally, and I went 38 times, and I was one of the highest paid people that went to Japan. I was the highest paid guy in the UK for a long time, and when I went in Europe, individual matches in Europe, which I did all the time, I was getting huge amounts of money, and in those days the UWF were just about starting off, and they were talking about doing this new Ultimate Wrestling and all the rest of it, and I was looking very interested in that, and yeah, I'd have probably ended up doing something with that, but I had a fantastic contract with New Japan Wrestling, who looked after me. I was top of the bill. I mean, I was top of the bill when Kendo Nagasaki, when Hulk Hogan came across there, and Hulk Hogan was on the bottom of the bill and I was on the top of the bill. It just shows you times change, you know, and I was the main event there. I wrestled there 38 times over a period of about 8 years, and had fantastic audiences and crowds, and did lots of business there.
See, with your feud with Tiger Mask, you really, looking back on it, did change what was expected of a junior heavyweight. Previously, a junior heavyweight had just been a smaller guy working the main heavyweight style.
Business has changed now. When I first started, the heavyweights were top of the bill, and the lighter guys were down at the bottom. It's totally changed now. Even the American stuff we see on the television, a lot of the guys there, I mean, Eddie Guerrero was the world champion. He was my replacement as Black Tiger. He's only my size, and he was world champion, you know.
Were you aware at the time with sort of the response you were getting from the matches, both from the crowd and also from sort of your colleagues, as to how much of a change you were bringing about?
Yes, I was. I was absolutely intense on that, and I was fixed with my ideas, and was very unhappy for somebody to try and change my thoughts on it. I knew how the way that wrestling should go, and I backed my feelings up to the nth degree, and had lots of confrontations about it. But I do believe that our British wrestling was a forerunner of whatever's on TV now, and whatever Americans are going to do. We've done it early days with the UK stuff. The difference that we had then and now is that our show was wrestling with a degree of showbiz, whereas now it's showbiz with a degree of wrestling, a different angle altogether on everything. But I'm proud of the stuff that was on ITV. Our shows were watched by millions of people. It was a fantastic wrestling segment on the TV that should never have been taken off. It could have carried on today.
Now, you worked a one-off match in Madison Square Garden with Cobra for the WWF Junior Heavyweight title. Was there ever any talk of that turning into sort of a longer gig in the United States?
Well, I went to America quite a lot early days. I went to, and I knew Vince McMahon Sr. before Vince McMahon Jr. You know, I met all those guys, and the problem was that the American pay that they were offering me was nothing like I was getting by going to Japan and everything else. If I'd have gone to, I was going to Japan independently, and had a contract with them for 6 years, 7 years. And if I'd have gone and wrestled with a contract for Vince McMahon, that would have meant that I'd have had to go to Japan from WWF as it was then, and that would have meant about half the money I was getting at the time. I mean, I was making a lot of money with the Japanese contracts that I had, and that was more important to me than the WWF at the time.
I think at the same kind of time period, Stampede stylistically would have been a perfect fit for you, but of course if the money probably wouldn't have been as good there at the time.
I was making a lot more money by doing one-off spot shows all over Europe. I was in Paris one night. I was in Germany the next night. I'd be in Belgium. I'd be back to London. I'd be all over the place, and I was making a lot of money doing that. And to go to Stampede Wrestling and travel all over Calgary doing those little shows, it wouldn't pay my wages. It wouldn't be enough money for me to do it. And also, Dynamite Kid had just gone at the time. They asked me to go over there as well, and I couldn't make it financially viable for me to go there to do it.
Now, later on, you jumped from joint promotions to All Star. What was the sort of thinking behind that, and the things that led up to that jump?
The thinking behind that was a lot of things. They were restricting my. I was getting a lecture every day about not to do this and not to do that, and they won't show the TV show if you do this and you do that and you do that. And I had a deal. I mean, Brian Dixon and Oric Williams, who were really the promoters that took me away from joint promotions. Now, my dad wrestled for joint promotions. I knew all the promoters very well, and was very friendly with all the promoters. And because I was very friendly with them, because I was putting arses on seats, and that's what any professional business is around. And I was putting a lot of people on a lot of seats and a lot of venues on a lot of nights during the years that I wrestled for them. When I went to All Star, they treated me a lot better. They paid me a lot more. They gave me more freedom with what I was going to do. They didn't try and restrict me with my continental exploits, and also my Japanese and American. I went to America quite a few times. You mentioned once in Madison Square Gardens. I went a lot for Vince McMahon Jr. in different venues all over the place. But I mean, the whole idea of going with the independent promoters appealed to me, because the main person in the joint promotions TV world at that time was Big Daddy, and it was a total clash with me. When I went with All Star, I was the top man with them, so I had more freedom, you know.
So was there sort of any pressure when you were with joint promotions to tone down your style, so you weren't taking away from the other matches if they didn't have to try and compete with you?
Not as much as that, because we very rarely when we were on the same TV show. But there was pressure not to be too violent, which I couldn't help. My aggressive style was what it was, and I couldn't tone it down. It was all or nothing. And when I went in the ring, I went in there to give the best performance, to do the best I could, to be as aggressive as I could, to give the crowd value for money, and to come out on top. And that's what it was all about. And I didn't want somebody saying to me, I could tone it down, don't go out of the ring, don't do this, don't climb on the ropes, don't do all this sort of stuff. So I had the opportunity to go with Brian Dixon was a light at the end of the tunnel. I thought, this is perfect, this is the direction I'm going to go. And don't forget, I was aware all the time of because I was in touch with the American scene as well, and I was in touch all the time that the ITV shows were being filtered, and they were very soft compared with the stuff that the Americans were showing. And I knew that the enthusiasm from the public was going in the direction of the American style rather than the English soft style, where people were rolling about on the floor. The Americans were throwing chairs and jumping up and down and doing somersaults and dressing up like Red Indians, and the English guys were coming in a black pair of trunks and sitting in a hole for 20 minutes, and that wasn't what the English public wanted to see. They wanted to see the more dramatic stuff, which is what I was doing.
I think there's a very strong contrast. The first time the WWF TV aired over here, which was when the show started rotating between Joint, All Star and WWF, and one of the first matches they showed was a lumberjack match with Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, where he ended with a mass brawl. I think certainly amongst the children at the time who were watching, that was the ultimate joy. You'd be watching the sort of British wrestling as a sport, and you suddenly see this mass violent brawl. Yeah. What do you think the
that
world
was
of sport?
My main contention with everything. I'm saying, you're telling us to keep it to tone it down, and yet you're showing the American stuff which is turning on the throttle, and you can't really compete with that, because the kids would watch that. They thought it was great. When they took our show off the TV, the American WWF was sending a broadcast quality tape over to the UK, which the TV companies were putting on 4 o'clock in the morning, and the kids were all recording it, and they got fantastic viewing fees at 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's what really changed the mind as far as the American wrestling was concerned.
Now, what do you think ITV coverage of British wrestling would have looked like today if it hadn't been taken off in 1988 and been going?
It would have stepped up with the era. They would have definitely changed their styles. And there's some fantastic young talent around now, and they're unfortunate they're not getting the showcase that they need. I don't think for a minute that when it went off TV, wrestling in the UK stopped. Wrestling is alive and well in the UK. It's not attracting the audiences it used to attract. I mean, when I wrestled, when I was in my middle years in wrestling, Dale Martin Promotions used to promote 5, 6, 7 shows a night, and had wrestlers for each one of those shows. When you look at the small-time promotions that are happening now, it's sad to see because they haven't got the TV coverage. But that doesn't mean they've not got the talent. They've got some fantastic talent around, and I've seen quite a lot of these young guys that are exceptional, and should get some form of recognition for what they do, and they're doing it for the love of the game, not for the money. I mean, I did it partly for the love of the game, but a lot of it was for the money. And I was getting very well paid in those days. And the guys now who are doing it now, they're doing okay, but they're not doing as well as they could do and would do if they had some help from the TV companies.
I think a lot of the wrestlers sort of caught in a very difficult situation where they are working as much as they can part-time, but it's such a big step financially to then be able to work full-time and make a full-time living from wrestling.
To be honest, I'm a little bit out of touch with the financial situation in the UK. I do know that I turned pro at 17, I think, and I only made money in the business. And I know these guys now would struggle to do that.
Yeah, the problem is you can wrestle Friday and Saturday night in your area, and the problem is if you then wanted to work more, you might only be able to work Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and that's not enough to make a full-time living, so you can't give up your full-time job. You're sort of caught in a catch-22 situation.
So, but don't forget, in our days, only the top boys were fully professional. A lot of the fill the bill people had jobs as well, and a lot of them had a job and wrestled part time. The difference is here in America is that if somebody has some talent, or somebody looks different than everybody else and has something special to offer, that they can then take them out of the job they're doing and say to them, we'll give you a retainer, you can train for 6 months, and if it doesn't work, you go back to what you were doing before. And with that, with the backup, the financial backup that those guys have got, they can afford to do it, and they can afford to give them a contract and give them a wage while they're training, ready to start on the big circuit. Which the English promoters were the foremost in the world with making money. I mean, they were running 6-7 shows a night and making thousands of pounds in the 70s and 80s every single night, and didn't put one penny back into the business. The difference in America, they've had backing, up millions of pounds of backing, and they can just throw money after it to make it look spectacular, which they do. I mean, I heard that souvenir stuff was making $30 million US a year on the sales. I mean, UK don't ever sell a photograph even. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous that they don't even exploit that, because that all goes into the wrestlers' wage packets, and should do.
It's actually almost at the point now where live wrestling tickets, paying to see wrestling live, is one of the smallest parts of the revenue streams. You've got pay-per-view, merchandise, licensing to outside companies, which is obviously something that when you were around was never really on bill. It was the TV rights money, and the live gate was the most important thing.
Absolutely, and we did fill the halls. I mean, I know the glorious days, and I keep going back on this. I don't want people to think, listen to that old bugger talking about that. But we had full houses for a period of time when I was in the business. If I ever saw anything less than a full house, I was devastated. We used to turn people away every night. That was the golden years of wrestling. They all talk about this, the early 70s. It wasn't. The time when the real money was on the table was the 80s. And they were fantastic times. I mean, there was unbelievable audiences. We used to turn people away. I mean, the last night that I wrestled in Bellevue, which is my home place, and I was a bad guy in Bellevue. He was a Manchester guy, and I was a bad guy. And the people still used to come and see me. And I did a match with Marty Jones. They turned 1,400 people away at the gates, and that was on the Saturday. And on the Tuesday, they had the World Championship Amateur Wrestling with Pakistanis and Turkish and Russian guys there, and there was about 100 people in the audience. And I looked at that with sadness, because these guys I looked up to as being the icons of wrestling. Really, what the people wanted to see was the real hardcore professional wrestling which we used to offer them in the 80s.
Now, what advice would you give to a young wrestler starting out today, sort of based on your own career?
Right, the best advice I would give to him was to keep a balance, and you must learn the business through and through. You mustn't ever be unknowledgeable. You must know exactly what you're doing. You must learn the wrestling techniques and styles and all the rest of it. So then you could wrestle all over the world. If somebody you get into the ring with is a southpaw or comes in a different way, you're not going to be stood there with your finger in your mouth wondering what's going to happen next. You need to know and learn exactly all the wrestling styles and skills, and then you've got a broader base than wrestling in a small circuit of wrestlers where you know their styles and all the rest of it. Also, be different. There's no point in being just another guy who's offers the same as everybody else. Those people don't make money. And if you want to be a wrestler, you've got to make money. It's not going to be a wrestler and doing it for nothing. And also, don't sell yourself short. Don't do it for nothing. I mean, there's a lot of money in the wrestling business. Always has been. Unfortunately, the wrestlers didn't get it. I've been lucky enough to be able to get some of it. So, and a lot of the young guys that are wrestling now are doing it for nothing. They're wrestling small town shows. The promoters need to think about spending some money on the production, the promotion. We'll never compete with America. They've got the jump on us because they took our product and they've glittered it up. They've dusted it with war paint and glitter, and they've made some characters out of people that they've picked up as being unusual characters, muscle men and acrobats and different characters, and they've spent some money in creating those characters, and that's what people now want to see. And it's not going to happen if you've got a normal guy wants to be a normal wrestler. They've got to be something different. I'm not talking about taking steroids and getting to be 300 pounds with muscles coming out their ears. I'm talking about learning the business. People still appreciate wrestling skills, and you can never ever get past that. You're going to have to, if you can wrestle, and you can wrestle at any level, if you can wrestle at any level, then you can wrestle anywhere in the world. And there's wrestling going on not just in England. There's wrestling going on all over the world all the time. It's a sport that will never die. It was in the first Olympic Games. It will be here as long as men are walking on two legs. Wrestling will be a sport and a skill that should be looked up to, not looked down at.
Well, that pretty much wraps things up. Thank you very much for your time. And just finally, do you have sort of any message for your fans?
Yeah, great. I'm thrilled to bits that people are still watching and enjoying the wrestling channel, and they're watching the World of Sport. And I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but the World of Sport, the World of Sport sections on the wrestling channel are getting higher viewing figures than a lot of the other stuff.
That's correct.
Well,
by quite a margin, still very popular.
You've just confirmed it. And that just goes to show that some of the Minneapolis wrestling and those small town wrestling shows will never compete with the characters that we had. They might not have been covered in glitter, and they might not have been muscular and like they are in America, but they do attract the crowds, and the crowds still love them.
Hey, well, Mark Rocco's promoting ITV Wrestling, the A to Z of ITV Wrestling. Thank you very much for your time.
John, thank you, and good luck to all the fans.
Thank you.
And good luck to all the wrestlers, the new wrestlers that are coming on board. Learn your business and make some money.